Melissa Wolfenbarger was born on September 9, 1977, in the small town of Locust Grove, Georgia. She was the youngest in her family, with an older sister who, at 7 years old, helped their mother care for her from the very beginning. As the years passed, the two sisters grew incredibly close. During high school, Melissa met a young man named Christopher, and not long after graduation, the two were married. They settled in a quiet Atlanta suburb, where Christopher found work at a glass manufacturing plant. Soon after moving, Melissa became pregnant, and the couple welcomed a daughter, followed later by a son. By 1998, at just 21 years old, Melissa was primarily focused on raising her children. Although young, she felt fulfilled by her growing family. She made an effort to visit her parents and sister whenever she could, but with the distance and her responsibilities, those visits became infrequent. That Christmas, she and her family had planned to spend the holiday with her parents. A month earlier, on Thanksgiving, Melissa had called her mother with a special request. She wanted an old photo of her grandfather. Her mother searched through the albums, found the perfect one, and eagerly awaited Melissa's arrival with the kids. But when Christmas came, Melissa never showed up. At first, her parents were surprised but assumed she might have been overwhelmed with two small children, especially since she had just started working at a cafe to help supplement Christopher's income. What complicated matters was that they couldn't simply call her. Melissa's home didn't have a phone, and cell phones weren't yet common. Normally, she phoned them from her in-laws' house, but since her last call on Thanksgiving, they hadn't heard from her once. When Melissa failed to call on her mother's birthday, her parents began to fear something was wrong. That's when they decided to go to Atlanta to check in on her, only to be met with an unsettling surprise. Melissa and Christopher's home was completely vacant. Neighbors explained that the family had moved out shortly after Christmas, but no one knew where they had gone. Confused, her parents couldn't fathom Melissa relocating without telling them. Eventually, they managed to contact Christopher's parents and, through them, reached Christopher himself. His explanation only raised more questions. He claimed that Melissa had left him in December and hadn't been seen since. According to him, she had gone to California to start over, leaving him and the children behind. Melissa's parents doubted his account. They couldn't imagine her abandoning her 1- and 2-year-old children, and if she truly had left, they were certain she would have at least called or visited. Still, Christopher stuck to his story, offering no additional details. Frustrated and without answers, Melissa's parents went home determined to keep searching. In the following months, they reached out to friends and relatives, but Melissa seemed to have disappeared without a trace. In the spring of 1999, Melissa's mother saw a news report that chilled her. Police in Atlanta had discovered a human head, bleached and placed in a bag, in a wooded area. Soon after, 4 more bags containing additional remains were found. What disturbed her most was that the site was located near Christopher's old workplace, and she immediately feared the remains might be her daughter's. Relief came when authorities later identified the head as belonging to a missing man from another case. Still, Melissa remained missing. By early 2000, her parents finally reported her disappearance to the police, but investigators weren't much help. After speaking with Christopher, they concluded that Melissa had probably left voluntarily to start fresh, which explained why she hadn't made contact. With that assumption, the case was never seriously pursued. But Melissa's parents refused to accept that explanation. The longer she stayed missing, the more convinced they became that foul play was involved, and that Christopher was responsible. They knew Melissa and Christopher's relationship had been troubled. He had physically abused her more than once, and on several occasions, Melissa had fled with the children to her parents' house. Each time, however, Christopher begged for forgiveness, convinced her to return, and she eventually gave in. That pattern only made his story more suspicious. If he had always fought to win her back before, why hadn't he tried this time? He never contacted her parents, never filed a report, and made no attempt to bring her home. Adding to the suspicion was Christopher's claim that Melissa had left without taking any of her belongings, not her clothes, jewelry, or even important documents. Everything about the story felt wrong. Yet with the police unwilling to investigate further, her parents felt helpless. For years, Melissa remained missing, until 2003, when the case took an unexpected and shocking turn. Police had reopened a murder case from 1977 that had gone unsolved for 26 years. After revisiting the evidence and running DNA tests, investigators identified the killer, Carl Patton, Melissa's father. But that revelation was only the start. Once in custody, Carl offered a deal. He would confess to 3 additional murders in exchange for full immunity for his wife, who had helped him cover up the crimes. As part of the arrangement, Melissa's mother agreed to testify against him, and she too was granted immunity. According to their confessions, in December 1977, a woman named Mary, who was close to Carl, offered him $15,000 to kill her husband. She claimed her husband was unfaithful and, having taken out a life insurance policy on him, she wanted the payout. Carl agreed and enlisted a friend to assist. When they confronted the man, his mistress was with him, and they decided to kill her as well. The woman's body was dumped in a river, while the man's corpse was left in his car on train tracks to resemble an accident. A month later, Carl told his wife that his accomplice had boasted about the crime to his girlfriend, and he now wanted to silence both of them. He invited the couple over, murdered them, and with his wife's help, disposed of their bodies in a river. She also helped him clean the scene and the van used to transport the remains. Carl later admitted to a 5th killing, committed 5 years before the others. Once again, Mary had paid him, this time to kill her first husband. With these confessions, Carl was officially charged with 5 murders, and detectives immediately began to suspect him in Melissa's disappearance. Carl, however, insisted he had nothing to do with his daughter's case. Investigators eventually leaned toward believing him. Originally suspected in just 1 homicide, he had voluntarily confessed to 4 more, insisting that guilt and regret drove him to come clean. But then he made an unusual request. He asked to meet with the detective who had tied him to the earlier murder. "You caught me," Carl said. "Maybe you can find my daughter." The detective was struck by the irony. Here was a man who had admitted to 5 killings, now asking him to track down his missing child. Intrigued, he agreed to look into Melissa's case. The detective revisited the scant details of her disappearance and quickly honed in on a forgotten clue: the bags of human remains found years earlier near Christopher's workplace. At the time, investigators had assumed the remains were from a man, but this was never supported by forensic evidence. With decomposition making identification difficult, the detective ordered a new DNA test, using Carl's DNA for comparison. The results confirmed his suspicion: the remains were Melissa's. With this breakthrough, authorities reclassified Melissa's case from missing person to homicide. The medical examiner determined that her body had been dismembered with a reciprocating electric saw. Strangely, her torso was never recovered despite multiple searches of the wooded area where the other remains had been found. Investigators soon uncovered a critical lead. When they dug into Christopher's past, his former employer at the glass factory revealed he had been fired around the time of Melissa's disappearance, after allegedly stealing an electric saw, the same type believed to have been used in the crime. Melissa's mother also told police that Christopher had abused her daughter, and they found he had a criminal record. Even more suspicious, Christopher had changed his name almost immediately after Melissa's death, though no one knew why. All signs pointed to Christopher as the prime suspect, but police still lacked hard evidence. They questioned him repeatedly, though his story often shifted. At one point, he claimed Melissa had left with a lover. Later, he said she had gone into hiding while selling fake IDs. Another disturbing detail emerged. After moving out, Christopher left his children with his parents and played little role in their lives. He visited occasionally, but the children barely understood he was their father. Even with all of this, detectives couldn't build a strong enough case to arrest him. Hoping for physical evidence, they obtained a warrant to search the house Melissa had lived in at the time of her death. Given that an electric saw had been used, they suspected the murder had taken place there. Forensic specialists carefully combed through the house, collecting samples from the floors and other surfaces, searching for any trace of blood or other clues. Unfortunately, the forensic work at the time produced no results. Technology was far less advanced than it is today, so the collected samples were simply stored in an evidence warehouse in hopes they might someday prove useful. Detectives tried several more times to uncover new leads or get Christopher to reveal something, but every effort failed, and the case eventually went cold again. During this time, Melissa's father was convicted and sentenced to 5 life terms plus 20 years for his crimes. Mary, the woman who had paid him to carry out 2 of the murders, had died in the late 1980s, so she never faced justice. Meanwhile, Melissa's mother and sister never stopped trying to push the investigation forward. They stayed in touch with detectives and worked to keep Melissa's story in the media, but progress was non-existent. This continued until 2017, when Melissa's mother, still determined to find answers, attended a gathering of true crime enthusiasts focused on cold cases. There, she met crime analyst Cheryl McCullum and shared her daughter's story, adding the startling detail. "My husband committed 5 murders, and I helped him." The statement immediately caught Cheryl's attention, and she began digging into the case. She interviewed Melissa's family and even kept in contact with Carl, who was serving time. What struck her most was how a man who had killed 5 people seemed more worried about his daughter's unsolved murder. Over the next few years, Cheryl gathered every piece of information she could. She became convinced that the most likely suspect was Melissa's husband, Christopher. While no direct evidence linked him to the crime, the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. His history of domestic abuse, his indifference after Melissa vanished, and the fact that he carried on with his life as though nothing had happened. The most damning clue was that, just before Melissa's disappearance, Christopher had been accused of stealing the exact type of saw used to dismember her remains. Melissa's entire family, including her now-grown children, firmly believed he was guilty. Cheryl also sought advice from major figures in the true crime community, including journalist Nancy Grace and several law enforcement experts. After reviewing the case, they all reached the same conclusion: Christopher was almost certainly the killer. But with no definitive proof, the case remained stalled. Nancy Grace eventually suggested Cheryl launch her own podcast to raise awareness. Public attention, she noted, can often bring forward witnesses who didn't realize their information was important. Cheryl followed the advice, and in 2023 she released the first episode focused on Melissa's case. She went on to publish multiple episodes, featuring Melissa's mother and relatives, presenting all the details she had gathered. Still, the case didn't move forward until April 2024. After one episode aired, a witness contacted Cheryl claiming he might have valuable information. He said that just before Melissa disappeared, he had witnessed a heated argument between her and Christopher. While investigators did not release the full details, sources suggest that during the fight, Christopher may have threatened Melissa. Cheryl quickly passed this account to the police, and it proved to be a turning point. Investigators reopened the case, and over the next 3 months they re-examined the evidence with modern technology, interviewed everyone connected to the case, and analyzed the bags containing Melissa's remains along with samples from the house she had lived in. Then, in August 2024, police held a press conference to announce a stunning update. 25 years after Melissa's murder, her husband Christopher had finally been arrested. Authorities declined to share specific details of the evidence, likely to protect the case before trial, though sources suggest modern forensic testing may have uncovered DNA or other strong proof tying him to the crime. For now, Christopher sits in jail awaiting trial, with his preliminary hearing still pending. Melissa's family, along with investigators, are confident that justice will finally be served. After nearly 26 years, the case appears to be nearing its end. Melissa's story has spread nationwide, both because of its shocking twists and because her father's arrest for 5 other murders inadvertently reopened the door to finding her. The podcast then became the catalyst that brought forward a key witness, ultimately leading to Christopher's arrest. Her children, who also believe their father is guilty, now wait for the trial. They not only hope for a conviction but also long to understand his motives, something that may only come to light if Christopher chooses to confess. If you found this case intriguing, make sure to like and subscribe. We upload new crime case videos every night. Stay tuned and brace yourself for what's coming next.